Yaat e shike a do shidine. She shalilo yenishya. Bilagana nishle. Nanastasia tachini bashishchi. Bilagana dashache do tabaha dashanale. Lo kantia de nasha. Hello, my name is Shelley Lowe. I am Navajo from Ganado, Arizona, and I am a member of the National Council on the Humanities. I sing greetings from Cambridge, Massachusetts, the traditional territory of the Massachusetts tribe, where I live and work. I am delighted to say a few words about Educating for American Democracy, a project funded and supported by a cooperative agreement between the National Endowment for the Humanities and the U.S. Department of Education, and spearheaded over the past year and a half by the dedication and perseverance of iCivics. In thinking about the importance of civic education and the work of this project, I reflected on my own experience and education. I grew up and received my early education on the Navajo Reservation, where I had the unique opportunity to learn not only about U.S. history, federal and state government, but also about Navajo history, Navajo government, language, and culture. This education taught me about the important role I play as a citizen of the Navajo Nation and prepared me to further learn in college how tribal governments interact with state and federal governments, and how my identity and history fits into a larger national democratic narrative in important and unique ways. The beauty of the civics education I received is that it was geared to my reality, growing up on a reservation spanning multiple states that was created in a treaty with the United States government. Thinking back on this experience, I understand the significance of the civics education I was immersed in and how that education has served as a foundation in both my professional and personal life. The National Endowment for the Humanities has a long and varied history of supporting civics education in both formal and informal settings. Over the course of the agency's 55 years, the NEH has funded projects ranging from state humanities programs that use history, literature, and philosophy to promote dialogue on civic life, education programs such as symposia and professional development programs that advance the teaching of civics at both the university and K through 12 levels, research dealing with the role of civics in everything from ancient Pompeii to the civil rights movement, films, radio programs, exhibitions, and digital projects on the founding of the Constitution, its amendments, its legacy, as well as preservation efforts that have collected, preserved, and made available some of our most important documents. But the impetus behind supporting the Educating for American Democracy project was to offer a direct way of addressing socioeconomic, ethnic, cultural, and curricular disparities in civics education. There is a recognition that, despite the incredible work taking place in the humanities through projects such as these, there has been a lag in support of civics education as a whole at the federal level. While this project won't solve that on its own, it is nonetheless an acknowledgement that reinvestment in this work is not only overdue, but essential. As a product of this type of investment, this project highlights the role that the humanities can play in building civic strength across ideological lines in our country, starting in kindergarten and running through high school graduation and beyond. In offering up a roadmap for civics education, this project is not an attempt to prescribe the adoption of standardized content across the country, but instead to model humanities-driven inquiry, to provide broad-based and consensus-driven frameworks that allow for the direction and redirection of civics education. It is a support mechanism for existing content and curriculum, not a curriculum in itself, a set of guiding principles about the what, why, and how of teaching American history and civics in order to sustain our constitutional democracy. In this sense, the Educating for American Democracy project stresses the crucial ways that the humanities can be a central force for bringing the country together over some common ground, our contested but nonetheless shared histories, cultures, and civic ideals that constitute American democracy. The humanities help us to explore who we were, and who we are. But this project re-enunciates just how central humanities and civic education are to our country moving forward. I thank you for being part of this important work and for your commitment to civics education and for joining us today from across the nation. Yeah.
I'm Anthea Hartig, the Elizabeth McMillan Director of the National Museum of American History of your Smithsonian Institution. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and our esteemed Secretary of the Smithsonian, Dr. Lonnie G. Bunch III. Lonnie has an amazing career as a historian, museum leader, and intellectual, and it is truly a gift that he is serving as our secretary for this moment. And it is our pleasure that we welcome Lonnie to give the introductory remarks for the Educating for American Democracy opening forum.
Hello, and welcome to this vital forum to maximize the power and potential of a robust education in history and civics. I can't imagine a better time to unveil a roadmap to help students learn about our shared past as a nation, functioning of government, and the responsibilities of citizenship inherent in our ongoing democratic experiment. I was pleased that the Smithsonian was involved in this important project, with people serving on the steering committee and on one of the task forces, and especially co-hosting today's event with the National Archives Foundation. Thank you to the National Endowment for the Humanities, iCivics, and all the partners who made this possible. The Educating for American Gap is needed more urgently than ever. Given the events that transpired over the past few weeks, if there was ever a time that illustrates the importance of knowing our history and understanding our duties, it's now. We are all witness to history. On January 6th, we watched in horror as the very pillar of our democracy, the sanctity of our elections, was attacked. Our precious gift of self-determination hung in the balance. But we also got to see the resiliency of a system when a new president was sworn in, ultimately transferring power without incident, a sharp contrast to undemocratic societies. Our public classroom gives students the tools to understand what is happening, what historical antecedents explain current events, how government affects them. We can see that what happens when people are susceptible to misinformation, to conspiracy theories, to their own grievances and hate. Education helps change that by broadening perspectives. I have always been captivated by history, so the notion that we can't prioritize it in our schools is an anathema to me. As a young child, my grandfather would read history books to me. One of my earliest memories was him showing me a black and white picture in one of those volumes. A group of kids about my age were gathered in a 19th century classroom. When my grandfather read me the caption, "Unidentified school children," those words struck me. How could these children have lived their entire life and be forgotten? Who were they? What happened to them? When I look back now, I think formative moments like that shape me more than I realize. They shape my entire career because I've tried to give voice to the voiceless and make visible what is often invisible. I don't think it's any secret that civics and history have largely been marginalized in schools since I was a kid. If we are to give people the tools for understanding, if we are to have the informed electorate necessary for a functioning democracy, that must change. That is why this roadmap, focused on integrating history and civics in every grade using inquiry-based model, is so important. In creating the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I knew it was necessary to include a comprehensive view of history, including the painful as well as the triumphant. That we should be comfortable with complexity and nuance. Not only is that an authentic way to approach history, it's a way to build trust. So it is for civics and history education. We must meet students where they are. We must be willing to listen. Museums can help by crafting thoughtful, inclusive, honest educational programming, digital resources, and exhibitions. I'd argue it's central to our mission as museums to make our communities, our regions, and our nations better. We can do that not just by looking back, but by working with partners like you to create content that inspires robust civic participation and tells the lesser-known stories in American history. I look forward to seeing what impact this tremendous collaboration has on the country's public education in the coming years. Thank you, and have an inspiring and productive forum.
Greetings. I'm Patrick Madden, Executive Director of the National Archives Foundation, and we are thrilled to contribute and support this important and timely project and serve as a partner to the Smithsonian Institution for the national rollout of the roadmap. For nearly 30 years, the National Archives Foundation has been deeply committed to civics education and literacy, both in the formal settings of schools and informal settings like museums and historic sites. As of late, the rancor in our civics discourse have left young people with more questions than answers. Collectively, we recognize the urgent need to ground the next generation in the historical facts, in the details of how our government works, their role in our nation's future, and their responsibility to work towards forming a more perfect union. This is what the roadmap, with all of our support, aspires to accomplish. I'm pleased to introduce the 10th Archivist of the United States. David Ferriero joined the institution in 2009 and oversees more than 40 facilities around the country, as well as the Presidential Library System. Committed to the principles of open government, the National Archives staff delivers on its mission each day through social media outreach, encouraging contributions of citizen archivists, expanding digitization, modernizing access to the nation's records, and leading civics education and literacy efforts around our founding documents and the more than 15 billion records in its holdings. Please welcome our partner and the 10th Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero.
Welcome, and thank you for taking part in the Educating for American Democracy National Forum today. On January 6th, I stood in my office window overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue and watched an angry mob make its way from the Ellipse rally to Capitol Hill. These fellow Americans were on their way to disrupt a sacred ceremonial rite of presidential transition. I was horrified to watch the storming of the Capitol and the increased agitation of the mob still streaming by our building. Not since 1814 have the hallowed halls of Congress been breached, and those were foreign troops. Our own countrymen invaded the Capitol that day. For decades, civic literacy, individual rights, and historical understanding have been waning in America. The events of January 6th were a stark reminder that teaching civics has never been more important in this country. The National Archives is home to our nation's most sacred documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. These charters of freedom make up our foundation as U.S. citizens, and yet most Americans do not know what is actually written in them. Recent statistics show that 68% of Americans can't correctly name all three branches of the U.S. government. 33% of Americans can't name any of the rights guaranteed under the First Amendment, and 75% of Americans can't pass the U.S. citizenship exam. The release today of the Roadmap for Excellence in History and Civic Education for all learners is well timed. As a nation, we need to make civic literacy a high priority. At the National Archives, we are doing our own part to support teachers and students, helping them become active participants in our national civic life. We're doing this through our civics education programs. In our Center for Legislative Archives, we have conducted educator professional development workshops for more than a decade. The National Archives is working with the National Archives Foundation to dramatically expand these workshops to provide educators with tools and strategies to teach students about the Constitution and key moments in U.S. history. In our presidential libraries across the country, we have created White House decision centers. Students spend days preparing for and participating in a dramatic role-playing exercise related to real historical events using facsimiles of the records used by the original decision makers. And our Docs Teach initiative provides students and teachers with access to over 10,000 facsimiles of primary sources covering a wide variety of civic and historical topics. Teachers can discover and create online activities that help illustrate abstract civic concepts through real-life examples from the holdings of the National Archives. With hands-on access to primary sources and analysis techniques, students will form a connection to historical evidence and deepen their understanding of the past and our nation's founding principles. And teachers can help their students understand what government does, why it matters, and prepare them for a civic life. Today's forum and the release of the roadmap are a good start in strengthening civic literacy in this country. I look forward to seeing where the roadmap will take us and continuing this national conversation.
Hi there, my name is Kimberly Eckert, and I'm the Director of Educator Development at the Louisiana Department of Education. But way more important than that, I'm still a practicing high school teacher, albeit virtually, in Bruley, Louisiana. And I can tell you firsthand that there has never been a more critical time for students to have a teacher that's armed with a framework and a roadmap like the Educating for American Democracy framework, because we see exactly what it looks like whenever a society feels disenfranchised and when they feel powerless and when they feel voiceless and they're unsure about how to responsibly and effectively contribute to their democracy. And I can tell you that over the past several years, the hardest thing to impart to my students, and something that is done so well through the Educating for American Democracy framework, is that students and their identity and exactly who they are is exactly what a thriving democracy needs to be able to be strong and to be able to help students understand that it's their identity within their school, within their families, within our classroom, within the community. That's what makes everything work. And it's important that students leave school understanding that the name of the game was never for them to assimilate into a space. Instead, it was to make that space better because they were in it.
My name is Johnny Moore, and I spent the first 13 years of my career in higher education at Liberty University. And here's something we need to recognize. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you live on a city in the coastal part of the United States or in the middle of the country, we have a crisis of civics in the United States of America. And the Educating for American Democracy initiative has given us a roadmap through that crisis. But here's what I love about this roadmap. It's a humble roadmap. It's not about picking which part of the American story is the story that we ought to indoctrinate our future generations with. It's about identifying the questions that need to be asked so that our future generations understand how to be Americans. And for all of the issues that concern us in the United States of America, our partisan politics and the division that seems to be separating us every direction we look, it's time that we start looking a little deeper and recognizing that if our citizens don't even understand the history of our country or what makes it unique in history or how we have struggled through our tensions and our failures, then how will they be able to lead us in future generations? What I love about this project is it is a thoughtful step in the right direction, which all along the way doesn't take the power away from the local communities to decide what they need to do for their own future citizens. It's brilliant, and I'm proud to be associated with it.
Hello, I am Judy Woodruff with the PBS NewsHour, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you to this provocative discussion we're going to be having over the next hour, a little bit more than an hour, about this wonderful project around educating for democracy. We have several fabulous panels, people we're going to be talking to about the subject that is so important right now for our country. Let me introduce to you first the members of the first panel. They are Danielle Allen, who is with Harvard University's Safra Center, Safra Ethics Center. She's also a professor at Harvard. Paul Carisse, who is director of the ASU, that's Arizona State University School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. And finally, Jane Kaminsky, who's a historian and a professor at Harvard. It's so great to see the three of you. We don't need much of a preface. I think everybody understands the significance of this moment. We are in such a polarized time in this country, certainly coming off the events of January 6th, the historic and unprecedented terrible attack on our Capitol, the sense that so many Americans don't understand what our democracy is, don't understand the importance of our government. So we have three people who are uniquely qualified to talk about that and about why it's so important to educate the next generation. So let me start out with you, Jane Kaminsky. Why do we need this educating for democracy, for American democracy now? What is it about this time that makes this the right moment for this?
Well, I think you've said some of it, Judy, that we have every sign that our constitutional democracy is in peril. We've had years of polarization resulting in a deeply divided United States. And crucially, young people are losing confidence in our form of government and in their ability to participate in civil society. So we need to rebuild our civic strength in order to draw on the capacities of all of our people to solve the nation's problems. We're here in part because the American educational system has neglected history and civics at all levels. We now have a citizenry and an electorate who are poorly prepared to understand, to appreciate, and to effectively engage in our demanding form of self-government. And one indicator is that the 2018 NAEP civics exam shows that less than a quarter of eighth graders scored proficient or above in civics, and that the history results were even worse, only 15% as proficient or above. The deficit comes in part from a lack of investment. In the 1950s, Sputnik led to STEM commitments in the interests of national security, and then in decades later, economic competitiveness spurred us on, and those investments worked. We now invest about $50 a student each year in the important STEM fields, yet only 5 cents per student per year on civics, or a ratio of 1,000 to 1. Students also face unequal access to learning opportunities in history and civics in the US. Related to this lack of investment, we haven't previously succeeded in the hard, deliberative work to reach consensus about what and how we should teach these subjects about which Americans rightly feel passionate because they're the subjects that constitute us as a people. Addressing these problems requires a bold and innovative solution, and this team believes that the roadmap to educating for American democracy, which represents hard-fought, hard-won consensus across a large team of practitioners and scholars with genuine viewpoint diversity, is that solution.
And Jane Kaminsky, we're going to be coming back to you in just a moment to pick up on that. But Danielle Allen, tell us how this all got started. What was the impetus for it? And what was it? What is the goal here? What are you trying to accomplish?
Thanks so much, Judy. Well, each of us brought a passion for civic education to this process. In my own case, that goes way back to the early 2000s when I helped build a night program for low-income adults and to reconnect people to opportunity, and had an amazing experience teaching the Declaration of Independence and finding that it electrified my students, which was a great surprise to me. And that really led me into a course of discovering just how little access to civic education so many people have and how empowering it can be. So across many institutions, teachers, educators, scholars, lots of us have been toiling for decades on behalf of civic education. And then in the summer of 2019, the National Endowment for the Humanities put out a call for proposals asking for somebody to create a roadmap for excellence for history and civic learning for all learners K through 12. We answered the call, a group of us from Harvard, from iCivics, from Tufts, from ASU, from the Department of Education in Arizona. We wanted to build a very diverse group of practitioners and scholars and educators and deliver guidance for educators, for school districts, for states, so that we can rebuild history and civic learning and excellence in those fields.
And Paul Carisse, we are such a polarized country right now. Almost everything seems suffused with politics. I mean, how do you prepare for what will surely be some pushback from some quarters about what you're trying to do?
Well, first of all, thank you, Judy, for this. And it's an honor to be talking with you and working with my colleagues in this national project. As both Jane and Danielle have mentioned, we thought that coming together as scholars from different disciplines, political science and history and others, different philosophical, scholarly points of view, roughly liberal, conservative, different parts of the country, private universities, public universities, school teachers, all of that was both a model for what is needed in education and in the country, and absolutely essential for the task of educators trying to prepare new generations of citizens and Americans to understand the operating manual for this wonderful form of self-government, understanding our historical origins and extraordinary journey, our constitutional principles, and of this very difficult form of politics and government to operate. So we knew that polarization was a cause of the failure to properly invest in and develop proper priority for curriculum in civics and history education. And we knew that we could do something about it after the call came from the NEH and the U.S. Department of Education. So we have tried very hard to listen to each other in the sort of executive team, then in the various task forces and panels and all of the contributing groups we've talked to and individuals we talked to. We fully expect that because it's a free country, there will be disagreement with this. I would say to my conservative friends, this is not a national curriculum. This is not a one-size-fits-all attempt to force anything on the states, but it does call for debate in the 50 states, in DC and the territories and tribal nations, precisely because that is our constitutional principle, that education, including in civics and history, is largely a state and local matter. But we wove in, I'll just finish with this, we wove into the study, to this roadmap, to the report explaining it, the idea of debate and disagreement. This is what Americans do. We've been doing this since the 17th and 18th centuries, agreeing on certain things and disagreeing on just what the principles mean or just what our history means or how to prioritize. So we talk quite a lot in the roadmap and the report about civic virtues, to include civil disagreement and civic friendship. You know, Danielle and Louise and the other partners you'll talk with, these are my fellow Americans. These are my intellectual friends. These are my civic friends, even though we disagree on some very important things. But we think young people, K-12, can learn these civic virtues, as well as important historical, constitutional, political knowledge, and then be prepared to, I'll mention one other civic virtue, be prepared to be reflective patriots, reflective patriotism, that they love America, they're proud and grateful to be American, but they want to disagree about America, our failings, or just what our history is, just what our civic principles are.
Jane Kaminsky, give us an example of a gap, of something that's missing in what so many young people are learning today that you would love to see redressed with this project.
I think that in my discipline of history, the one and the many have gotten out of sync over a period of decades, really beginning in the 1960s, so that we have a tremendous amount of new knowledge about the histories of the gorgeous mosaic of American diversity, and we have become less skilled at teaching the national fabric that that brings us together. So I think a chance to embrace our diversity as learners, as teachers, as a political people, but also think thematically about what makes us one in the ways that the roadmap tries to do seems like a big opportunity as well as a gap to fill.
And Danielle Allen, how do you, I mean, for this moment with, sorry for the telephone, where racial justice, where the national reckoning around race is taking place in this country, how does that get incorporated into this?
Thanks so much, Judy. Well, there are really 5 key features of the roadmap that I want to call attention to, and then say something about how they connect to issues of racial reckoning and dealing with our hard histories. So the roadmap really asks that learners have the chance to shift from breadth to depth to pursue lines of inquiry. So we shift to questions rather than trying to deliver answers from on high. We have a structure of questions across all grade bands, across 7 themes that people are invited into inquiry around. So learners will have a chance to engage with primary sources, to wrestle with evidence, to debate the answers to questions. Those are really key features. We're integrating history and civics, so there's that learning of the chronology of our life together as a people and peoples and all the complicated change and conflict and transformation over time. But there's also thematic learning around the core concepts of democratic life, ranging from separation of powers in 3 branches to the role of social movements in changing our democracy. So the whole picture of what it takes for democratic people to make decisions together. We also work to make sure that educators can deal effectively with fundamental tensions. Lots of times educators are afraid to teach civics because they're worried it will take them into controversial territory. So we need to scaffold people in understanding how to support productive debate. That's a really key part of this. And as Jane said, we work throughout to integrate a diversity of experiences and perspective. And again, to cultivate those dispositions of civil disagreement and reflective patriotism, as Paul mentioned. And so it's really important that throughout the roadmap, we're telling stories of empowerment for all people. So as we look at our hard histories, we think about the issues of enslavement, we think about the issues of Jim Crow, we're making sure to ask questions about the kind of agency and empowerment that people brought to overcoming those challenges and difficulties. We're seeking hard at all points in our explorations to bring all perspectives to bear. So take also as an example, thinking about the American Revolution. You know, in state standards these days, it will be common to list a lot of names and dates that people should know. Shays' Rebellion, the Boston Tea Party, and instead we're again inviting people into questions. You know, what were the perspectives of the colonists, of indigenous Americans, of enslaved Americans, of free African Americans on the British government? So if you ask questions in that way, we have a chance to tell a woven story that brings together the different perspectives of each of us situated in America from a different history, a different family history, and a different social history. So there's a lot of work to support empowerment as well as to support inclusion and knitting together of a shared story.
So Paul Carisse, finally, if you're not imposing a view of American history on people, surely there is a baseline of information, of understanding that you want students to have, that you want young people to have as they grow up. So how do you make the distinction between what everybody needs to know and then building on that to a point where young people feel they confident enough to ask the kinds of questions you all are describing here?
We responded to a call from the federal government, which from the time of the founding has thought about the importance of education. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, others wanted a national university in the new national district. Couldn't get that established, but it's perfectly appropriate for the federal government to be thinking about educating American citizens for informed, engaged civic activity. We responded by saying we have to write excellent guidelines for civics education, for history education, and then invite our fellow American citizens, residents who aspire to be citizens, to join a debate and a conversation, which has to happen according to our constitutional principles. largely at state and local educational authorities at that level. So we will keep at this. You're going to talk to other colleagues about the terrific work they've done on preparing materials that states and localities can look at about how to take these common national American guidelines for excellent civics and history education, how they can adapt them, debate, and argue, and adopt and adapt as they see fit. And the Educating for American Democracy team and the website will stay available as resources. But this is really, this report and the roadmap are stage one completed, and further stages are now to come.
All right, we are thanking our panelists. We're going to be hearing from them again, but right now let's take some audience questions. We invited some teachers and students interested in this work to submit questions ahead of today's event. I have two students, one from Massachusetts and one from Maryland, who are joining us.
Hi, my name is Morgan Gibson, and I'm in 8th grade. I go to school on Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and I am passionate about ensuring that there is cultural awareness and diversity in school curriculum so that all students are equitably represented. I care about civic learning because I believe that the lessons learned in civics class are vital in helping students grow up to create positive waves of change and make an impact on our world for the better. My question is, how can we use the EAD roadmap to connect history and civics to our lives as students?
Hello, my name is Dhruv Pai, and I'm in the 11th grade. I go to Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm passionate about civic learning because of clear disparities in the quality and quantity of civic education between poor and well-off school districts and between urban and rural areas. I want to break down these barriers through the use of equitable civic education. I would like to ask the panel, how did students influence your thinking and design of the EAD roadmap?
Both of those terrific questions. Jane, let me turn to you for the first question from Morgan. And she asked, how do we use your roadmap, the EAD roadmap, to connect history and civics to their lives as students?
Thanks, Judy, and thanks, Morgan and Dhruv, for those great questions and the kind of preparation to do this work that gives us hope. I think the short answer, Morgan, to your question is we want you to see yourself and your family and your community in the story of our nation's past so that you understand your importance to the country's present and future. We want you to ask hard questions and learn to answer them effectively from evidence. And by deliberating about that evidence, even with people who disagree with you, maybe especially with people who disagree with you. We think the EAD roadmap's themes will guide your teachers, and the teachers will guide you in that approach of learning history content and civics concepts and civic skills through inquiry. I'll give you a quick example from our 7th theme, which is called A People with Contemporary Possibilities. Instead of simply drilling key events in our recent history, that theme in our roadmap poses questions like, how does knowledge of the American past help us to think about important political and economic debates today, including issues like climate change or individual rights and liberties or mass incarceration or property and taxation, public health and social order, political polarization? And what values and principles underpin different positions on these issues that might surface in your classroom? These questions demand that you connect history and civics to your own life and vice versa.
And just to quickly follow up on that, Jane, in some classrooms, is that going to depend on the teacher? Can the students influence the teacher in how these conversations take place?
So just going back to Paul's comments, we think there will be many different state, local, tribal, county, district level solutions to how the roadmap gets implemented. We do in our pedagogy guidance see a kind of push and pull between the instructor's driving hand and learning and authority and the students developing agency and talent. So we hope that classrooms will will model the principles of constitutional democracy, as well as teach the content of our constitutional democracy.
And Danielle, let me put Drew's excellent question to you. He was asking if any students were involved in designing this.
We did have student focus groups along the way in doing this work, as well as panels of students who participated in our several convenings. So we did consistently seek out student feedback. We also had a big community of educators who are working in the classroom with students every day, giving us feedback. So a lot of direct expression of what counts as relevant for students now. How can we formulate questions in language that engages students and young people? So absolutely, I think the student perspective is really critical. To Jane's point as well, if you look at the 7 themes, the first theme is civic participation. The 7th theme is people with contemporary debates and possibilities. And then in between themes 2 through 6, you get a lot of the historical content about changing borders and demography and the peoples of our country, as well as the story of our institutions and democratic concepts, civic concepts. So the point of that set of themes is really that at the end of the day, young people need to be asking themselves what their roles as civic participants are. And it's that orientation of a young person to a sense of belonging, a sense of participation, that was the driving force behind our efforts. We want everything to start from that, come back to that, as we really do seek, as Paul said, to equip young people to be informed, engaged, authentic civic participants.
All right, that is Danielle Allen, Jane Kaminsky, and of course Paul Carisse. Thank you all 3. We appreciate it. And I think now I'm told that we have questions from Twitter. So I'm going to pose. You stay. The 3 of you stay for these questions. I'm not going to be answering them myself. So here we go. Here's the first question from Twitter. How can we as classroom teachers convince our district leaders that our schools need more focus, more resources, more time? Danielle?
That is a great question. And one of the most important things to lift up this work is that we work together to build communities with shared purpose, to build that will. So there are districts that are already experimenting and innovating and adding time, and it would be great for them to reach out and put their hands up and say, hey, we can provide you a model, we can show you the pathway, we can tell you how we talked to our principals and our district leaders in order to advocate for that time. I also find that there is an amazing number of science educators who are interested in asking the question of how there can be more orientation to civic education in science classes. And I think building those collaborations with other disciplines is a really important part of getting that time in school for civic learning. But at the end of the day, this is about building communities of shared purpose. And that is really what we're trying to do here in the Educating for American Democracy initiative.
So,
Judy, could I jump in?
Sure, absolutely.
Go right ahead. Yeah, just to follow on Danielle's point, we hope all the viewers will read this roadmap for excellence in civics and history education for all learners and the report. And teachers are among those who can use the arguments and the evidence we adduce to say to their school community, this is a real priority. Our argument that a report from 30 years ago said we were a nation at risk about education, we think our very form of government, the freedoms and our principles of equality and liberty and self-government are really at risk right now. Schools are part of that. We're not saying schools are to blame. We're trying to come together as a higher education community, and school experts and other people in civil society. You are playing a role in that right now, Judy, to say that as all Americans, we need to come together and support schools and support teachers and support local communities to say this really is a problem we have neglected. It's really a self-inflicted problem, and we can do something about it.
The bottom line from what both of you are saying is there's every reason for teachers to be able to take what they're doing to their leadership, whether it's the school, the county, the municipality, whatever the district is, and to say we need more resources to handle this. There's another question coming in from Twitter, And Jane, I'm going to ask you this. The question is, during the course of your work, was there a specific topic or issue on which there was strong disagreement? And if so, how was it resolved?
I think we disagreed about foundational things. So we agreed on the importance of evidence, the importance of facts, the importance of truth, right? So that we had that firm foundation on which to adjudicate our disagreements. But even something so fundamental as what to call our form of government, right? We are both a republic and a democracy. Both of those terms were used at the founding by the people who framed our form of government. And there are strong political investments in each set of terms. We compromised on the frame constitutional democracy, which we use throughout the roadmap. So that's one example of a kind of foundational principle where we wanted to show the commitments across a wide swath of our political spectrum to describing our form of government adequately. I think there were other moments where the relationship of hard histories to more triumphal parts of American history and the right proportion, the right developmental levels at which to address hard histories in the classroom, since the roadmap goes from kindergarten all the way through senior year in high school. Those were issues that we tackled in a community of practice that I think really embodied the abilities to debate, disagree, and learn from each other. I've learned as much from the different kinds of diversity in this team. So viewpoint diversity, diversity of expertise, different situational locations for our practice as educators. I've learned as much from the diversity of this team than from any project that I've ever worked on in the course of my career.
That's saying something, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And Danielle, just one other. Sure, absolutely.
No,
I want you
well,
all
I'm just going to say,
I want you all to jump in.
Just to chime in, sorry, I can't help it. The experience that Jane is recounting is exactly what civics and history education for free people is. To be self-governing people, you must learn the civic virtues of listening and arguing and debating and figuring out what can be common understanding and shared history and shared principles, and what is still a matter of contention. But we do need to live together and govern each other, self-govern, at all the various complex levels of self-government in America. So we were aware as a team of scholars and teachers and curriculum experts and policy people and all the 300 plus people involved in the study, we were aware that we were trying to live out what we were offering as excellent guidelines for K-12 civics and history education for all Americans.
And such an important point to add. And I really do want to thank the three of you. We're going to say thank you for now. That's Paul Carisse, it's Jane Kaminsky, and Danielle Allen. Very good to have all three of you. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now we are going to hear from some special guests from across a range of perspectives. And we'll be back in just a few minutes for our next panel discussion.
Hi, I'm Jill Lepore. I teach history at Harvard, and I am so excited about the Educating for American Democracy project. There's always a need to study history. There's always a need to study American history as Americans. But I think that need is more keenly felt at this moment in our nation's history than at any other. And what I love about this project is its commitment to inquiry, to understanding history, not as a grab bag of facts, but as a method of humanistic inquiry, a way to get to the bottom of things, a way to find out what's true and what's not.
Hello, I'm Alan Gelso, and I'm a historian, a student, a writer, a teacher of American history, and I have been for most of my life. And I never lose an opportunity or miss a platform that lets me talk about the importance of our history to our civic life. That's why I've been so pleased to be part of the History Task Force for Educating for American Democracy. Through the many voices represented in its creation, through its innovative approaches, its learning strategies, and its professional development practices in K through 12 civics education, Educating for American Democracy promotes an appreciation of the ideals of our experiment in constitutional democracy. How greatly it has succeeded, how painfully it has sometimes failed. And it provides the motivation and the skills for a rising generation to face the challenges of our present and future through a candid understanding of our past.
My name is Steph Sperber. I teach 8th through 11th grade U.S. History and Civics in Enfield, Connecticut. I'm excited about educating for American democracy because my favorite 3 words in the Constitution are "we the people." The students I work with, however, especially younger students or students of color, don't often see themselves reflected in the formation of the government. Especially with outdated methods of teaching civics and U.S. history, students often feel left out, or at the very least, they feel like they have to wait until they're 18 to make a difference or feel important. I am most excited because the framework from the Educating for American Democracy project really offers students an opportunity to make change immediately where they are and where they're coming from. Students can really use their own identity to make an impact in their community and in their schools. And working on this framework created a really amazing group of educators who are passionate about sharing their ideas and their methods for teaching civics. And the network is really something that is valuable for all of us to really enjoy what we do and be better at it. And I encourage everyone to come join us in our work.
Well, thank you all 3. Wonderful perspectives to hear from the 3 of you. We appreciate it. And now we have another fantastic panel you are going to want to hear from. I'm going to introduce them right now. They are, as our first panel was, each one is a co-principal investigator for this project. So they all every one of them played an important role in pulling together what we are talking about today. So let me introduce them. And you can raise your hand when I say your name. Louise Dubé. Louise is the executive director of iCivics. It's the nation's largest provider of civics education. Kay Kawashima Ginsburg is director. Hi, Kay. There you are. Director of the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, also known as CIRCLE. She's also a leading researcher of youth voting and civic engagement. Peter Levine. Hello, Peter. Hi there. Somebody I've known a long time. Associate Dean of Tisch College at Tufts University. He's also a leading researcher of civic education. And our 4th panelist is Tammy Waller. There you are. Tammy, so good to see you. She is with the Arizona State Department of Education. Thank you very much, all 3 of you. We're now going to talk about what this EAD, Educating for American Democracy, looks like in action. What is expected to happen now that this has been launched? So let's start with you, Louise Dubé. This is a project with some ambitious goals. Why and how do you think you can achieve them? What happens now? What happens next?
Well, thank you so much for the question. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here with you today. Indeed, our project, this initiative, has very ambitious goals. We want 60 million students to have access to high-quality history and civic learning opportunities, 1 million educators to be EAD ready, and 100,000 schools to be civic ready by 2030. That essentially means every single student, educator, and school in our country. And that is really the scale of solution that our country needs. So you ask, Judy, how do we get there? How do we get from here to there? Our recommendations are take the approach of collaborative federalism, by which we mean that every level of governance has a role to play in coordination. So that means everybody from local schools and their communities, tribal governments, states, and the national level all together need to lean in. So very specifically, let me just go through a few of our recommendations so that people understand how this is going to turn from a report to practice. We are recommending that local school districts adopt civic learning plans. Civic learning plans are very simple documents. They simply outline how schools will meet the goal to graduate every student in their system prepared and engaged for constitutional democracy. It might lay out in the civic learning plan, for example, what kind of training educators will get, what kind of experiences will be made available to students, and what kind of excellence criteria will be used for progress. And on that score, we recommend that schools adopt history and civic learning excellence badges and award them at regular grade intervals. So for example, maybe 4th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade. In that way, we can follow whether progress is being made. And that measure will be both civic learning plans and excellence badges will be much more potent if states require those, right? If the states can aggregate the data from the civic learning plans and the excellence badges. In fact, we believe so strongly in this that we think parents ought to know that states should put this information in the state's school performance indicators. In that way, every parent can know, is my child going to a school that is committed to this mission? And that would be an easy way to find that out. Obviously, in addition, states should align their instructional standards with EAD, and that will make it very clear that, all the way in the policy from the standards to what is being taught in the classroom will be the same. And then in addition to that, they should invest in educator training and preparation. So that's for the states. For the federal government, there is clearly a role here. Only the federal government can track whether we're making progress across all states. We should have frequent and high quality measures of whether we're making progress on history and civics. And then we should invest in innovation and research, just like we do in STEM. The same level of investment is needed in civics and history. And then those are just a sample of our recommendations, many more in our report. Just wanted to outline that. And lastly, I'll just end by saying that our EAD initiative will push forth. We have a lot of work to do. We have on our site curated over 200 examples of content that's aligned to the roadmap. Any educator out there can go to educatingforamericandemocracy.org, all one word, and find materials that are aligned and have been carefully curated with a diversity of viewpoints. And they can get access to those free materials, and we will continue. We'll continue to curate more and more. We also want to field pilot projects. We think it's very important for parents and for educators to see what excellence looks like in action, and we want to field those pilot projects, and then finally we want to grow the list of advocates. We've had so many educators be excited about this work. We want to make sure to engage each and every one of us. We actually did a lot of sessions with educators, and the number one word that they use for this roadmap is excited. And that really was one of the most exciting moments for me and for the team, I think. It really validates the enthusiasm there is out there. And it's going to take all of us to get something like this done. So that's how we're going to get there, Judy.
Very, very good to hear all that. I want to turn to you, Tammy Waller, now, Arizona Department of Education. You're on the front line. You are there as the state education system tries to figure this out. How do you see states, especially states with different political lenses, putting this into action? What do you see as the obstacles? How do you get it done?
So the great thing about the roadmap is it's not a national standards document and it's not a curriculum document. It's an approach to learning history and civics and ultimately a set of principles. And it will be up to not only the states, but the LEAs, the districts and the schools to implement this. The idea is that the document can be used by states in many different ways, and it can be used to implement new state standards or to support the current standards that already exist. And the great thing is that the overarching themes and those questions can really fit into each state's standards and education system, because it will allow the states to connect their local history and their local standards. For example, in Arizona, we may look at this document and we may look at the idea of we the people and focus a lot on our relationship with our indigenous peoples and communities in our state, whereas Texas may choose to focus on some different examples under the theme. States like Massachusetts, which have that strong colonial history, may focus on that conflict, that early conflict with Great Britain. And then states like California may choose to focus on the Asian American immigration into their state and the impact of the gold rush. So that's the great thing about looking at these large themes and questions. When it comes to putting the roadmap into action, it's really going to be up to the states to determine how they will do that, and the local school districts and charters. So as a state specialist, one of the things that I do is I bring together my district curriculum leaders, and I'm really excited to share this document with them and talk about how this may be implemented within our state. I also belong to an organization with other state supervisors from across the United States and DC, and we talk about the issues in history and civics education, and just working with those states also gives us an idea of how this can be implemented. Of course, professional development is going to be one of the keys, and this is where the states can collaborate with associations and organizations within their state, but also with civil society and organizations outside to create those resources and professional development. So I think this roadmap will work well due to the diversity of the states and the flexibility of the roadmap.
You have given it a lot of thought. So it sounds like you've got a head start in the state of Arizona. What an exciting project. Kay Kawashima Ginsburg, how is what we're talking about, this task that we're saying to teachers is so important, how is that different from the way teachers teach now?
Thank you for this question. We heard throughout this project that teachers are passionate about teaching students about American history and civics. So why they want to teach civics and history is not going to change. It's a matter of how and how much resource they have access to. They work hard every day to teach civic and history to their students with very limited resources. And there has been little state and federal support for curriculum development, teacher professional development, assessment, and research and evaluation in civics and history education. And that neglect is reflected in the curricula and instructional practices every day. We heard from many educators and educators during the most recent election cycle that the intense level of polarization and a lack of reliable instructional resources and guidance actually resulted in many of them staying out of the topic of election altogether because it just seemed too contentious to them and they weren't sure what to do. The EAD is designed to support those classroom teachers, students, district, and community stakeholders to fill that gap and help them know what to do, when to do it, and then do it with such rigor and passion for civic education. It presents 6 pedagogical principles, which are designed to focus educators' effort on techniques that best support the content learning and development of student agency that are required of history and civic education. So, for example, an EAD teacher doesn't just use the roadmap inquiries to structure her lessons, convey the content, or just engage her student. That teacher can also work to cultivate students' capacity to develop deep and critical inquiries about American history and civic life and their identities and communities. So we're really hoping that the teachers and all the support team, whether it's a district leader, community members, and parents, as well as students, will take this on as their shared mission to strengthen civic and history education for everybody. The pedagogical methods that we list in our documents are anchored in research and program evaluation too, so that they're really sure what they're using is supported by verified research that also confirms the effectiveness of strong civic and history education on civic and other educational and developmental outcomes. So we hope that this can really revolutionize teaching of civic and history.
Fascinating to hear all of this. Peter Levine, let me turn to you now. I mean, back up a little bit for us. How much civic education is there right now in American schools? And I mean, give us a sense of what the gaps are.
I don't think you'll be surprised when I say not enough, not nearly enough. Although Kay rightly called out the fabulous teachers who do a great job every single day, often against the odds, and often with a lot of support from their own students. So when we talk about deficits, which I'm going to do because you asked me, we need to remember the assets too. We have thousands of dedicated teachers, but it's typical to have a half of a year, so one semester course in high school on civics. Not all kids get that, but that's sort of typical, and it's not very much. The typical recipe in high school for American history is 1 year, and so that's not very much. And in elementary, we've probably seen the worst erosions, and so in elementary, kids spend, let's say in 3rd grade, less than 3 hours a week on social studies. But remember, social studies is a lot of valuable things apart from American history and civics. It's also, the pyramids and ancient civilizations and learning how to read a map. So I think nobody knows the exact amount of American history and civics that's being taught in elementary school, but I think it's probably an hour or so a week on average. So when you have this limited amount of time, and we could talk also about, I won't this second, but we could talk about other limits, like limited amounts of professional development for teachers or limited amounts of high quality materials. But when you have these limits, what's missing is, first of all, inspiration. So, I mean, some teachers are fabulously inspirational and some kids are inspired or bring inspiration into the classroom themselves. But if you boil down civics to the bare minimum, and you end up just teaching the mechanics of government, and you don't inspire kids to be part of our system going forward, or you don't add much in that. And then if you boil it down to be too short and too little, you lose a lot of the completeness and the complexity of American history and our present. So, for example, Jane Kaminsky talked about how our history is both plural and shared. It's both a gorgeous mosaic and a common story. And you lose that. You're going to lose one of those things or the other, or both of them if you do it briefly. And you can't, if you have very little time, you can't combine sort of honesty, civic honesty, and critical thinking with patriotism, with reflective patriotism, because it's hard to put those two things together. And if you don't have time or resources or professional development, you're not going to do that. And finally, history and civics don't get integrated. So at best, or at least in a bunch of states, you have one course on each, and they're sort of separate. And they're just these two courses on their own. But actually, we should be learning history so that we can understand who we are as a people and be ready to go forward. And we should be studying, civics partly with an eye to the past. So with the roadmap, we've integrated those things as much as we can.
And another question for you in particular, but I want to go back to Louise. How do educators teach difficult subjects around which there is difficult, whether it's the Civil War or another moment in American history where there continues to be debate. The early part of the 20th century. I mean, what happened during the Depression? I mean, there are just so many moments over which we still have. How are teachers? How are systems to think about how to talk to students about these?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the point of our roadmap, right? So the idea here is that these questions are really beautiful. We have embedded in our roadmap design challenges. Those design challenges reflect fundamental tensions in America that continue to today. They range from, individual freedoms. What is e pluribus unum? Where's the e? Where's the pluribus? And where's the unum? And I think those have always been problematic for educators. And what we did through the roadmap is highlight those and make those transparent so that educators can work together to find ways to present those difficult tensions, not as though there's one solution, but to foster inquiry into our past, into different perspectives, to help formulate better answers, and to foster this approach, which is uniquely American, that we debate matters like this, and we continue to debate matters like this. So any attempt to have one single answer or to not address these controversial issues directly misses the point, I think. So our goal is both to make it more transparent, to provide the tools to support educators, and to forge that kind of approach going forward.
And just quickly, I'm going to ask you, Peter Levine, to put a button on that in terms of, because we do live in a time when there are disputed facts, I mean, basic facts. There's disagreement over the deficit, over you name it, not to mention American history. So how do you recommend that gets handled?
No, I think a big theme of the roadmap itself and also today's presentations is that disagreement is good. Disagreement is built into democracy. It's why we have a democracy. If we all agreed, we presumably wouldn't even need one. So disagreement is good, but we have to teach young people, allow young people to learn how to disagree well. And to some extent, that's a matter of settling on similar facts while disagreeing about the value judgments that you bring to them. But I think also people disagree about priorities of different facts or even how to understand the world around us. And that's okay. The disagreement is okay. I think we modeled disagreement, I really do, in the writing of this. And we want now to bring America's kids into that conversation. So we're not afraid of disagreement, in short. That's what I would say to you.
All right, this is such a great conversation. We do now have a few more questions from students and teachers who submitted these videos in advance. Let's watch that.
Hi, I'm Kim Eckert from Louisiana, and I have a really unique role in that in addition to teaching, I also get to support teachers. And so I was talking with my team the other day whenever we were looking at the Educating for American Democracy framework and trying to think of ways to really integrate this and put it in the hands of teachers. And I was wondering if you had any advice for teachers and their ability to really advocate in their space for use of this, because in many, many spaces, this might be a really drastic departure from a curriculum that they were using, or even a state of mind or a climate or a culture within the community that they serve. So if you have any tips for the ways that we can support teachers and that teachers can really support themselves in making sure that they are communicating to their students and to families and administrators why this is so critical and how it's going to help their students, that would be great.
All right, great question. Tammy, I'm going to come back to you. Tammy Waller, Arizona State Department of Education.
Well, Kim, that's a great question. And I have to tell you, this has been happening. I received quite a few texts from some of the teachers and district leaders that I work with in Arizona, very excited about this initiative and asking questions. I think one of the things that we need to do in terms of supporting teachers is really get the word out to communities, including the parents in the school district, the administrators in the school district, and then the teachers, because we all know that any type of educational reform or program has to start with the grassroots, with the teachers, the parents, and the administrators. So to me, this seems very much like doing a state standards implementation where you start out with information sessions, bringing in your different stakeholders and communities. We also have some really great tools on the webpage. We have briefs to inform parents, administrators, state policymakers, teachers about the benefits of the roadmap and to using that inquiry approach of braiding together the history and the civics. So that's really important. But it's not just the teachers, the parents, and the administrators. We also have to look towards our state to help support this and our state associations to help support this process. And ultimately, when these different entities work together, then we will be able to advocate, train, and support the teachers through the process.
And Kay, just another sentence or so on what would you advise for teachers on how they take this to parents, to administrators, and so on?
I completely agree with Tammy in that it is a community's shared priority. So there's a need to really call for action for everybody and take ownership and really make it your own EHO community. That's part of the beauty of this roadmap, which is that it's not a curriculum. So there's a lot of flexibility, local variation that can help people really feel like they're part of the making of a local curriculum. And when we heard from the teachers over the summer about this initiative, they felt that the successful initiatives happen when community members and teachers can join together to develop the idea and refine it. And that's what I would recommend.
All right, Kay and Tammy, thank you for those answers. We have two more students asking questions now. Let's hear from them.
Hello, my name is Madison Allen, and I'm a junior at Potomac High School in Oxon Hill, Maryland. I'm passionate about civics because while I was younger, I never got to experience it or engage in civics the way I truly wanted to. This is a reoccurring pattern as well, because as a high schooler, I still don't take civics. I take basic social study classes to meet graduation requirements. Civics is completely disregarded. I am extremely devoted to this matter because all students deserve to have a fair and purposeful civic education, regardless of whether you can afford it or not. The question I would like to ask the panel is, how do we begin to have teachers starting civic discussions at earlier grades?
Hi, my name is Renina Hani, and I'm a senior at Egg Harbor Township High School in New Jersey. I'm passionate about civics because I never truly had the opportunity to get to know what civics really is. Unfortunately, throughout my entire academic career, I've not taken one civics class, especially since New Jersey doesn't offer a requirement. However, that is up until my senior year. That is when I had the chance to enroll myself in AP Government and Politics and got a chance to get involved with my Equity and Civics Education Fellowship. I want students to understand the importance of how civics affects their daily lives. And I believe that every student should have the ability to take a class not only geared towards honors and AP students, but to everyone, regardless of academic level. I would like to ask the panel, how do we encourage our districts to think about equitable implementation of the EAD roadmap so that it's not just about AP or honor students?
Thank you both. And Peter Levine, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, Renine there, I'm going to take her second question first. She really makes an interesting point. How do you make sure it's in the curriculum before a student, I mean, even if a student isn't in AP, advanced placement?
That's right. That's right. And she's of course nailed the question, the most important question. She's getting a good civic education because she's a great student. She's able to get into an American government AP course. She's also motivated. She's interested anyway. And what we need is all kids to be given those opportunities and to be really required as well to study civics and history. So the roadmap is for all kids. I mean, it's a plan for K-12 It's certainly not just for special courses like American government, although they play a role. And we're also going to try to support, and are trying now to support implementation so that everybody can get the advantages of the roadmap. So even right now on the website for the roadmap, anyone can find hundreds of examples of lessons and materials that are produced by others. They're just curated by us, but that are aligned with the roadmap, and those are free. So that's a help to make this easier. But it's going to take more than just free resources on a website, although I think those are valuable. So we all need to be involved in advocacy for civics that comes in the form of both requirements at different levels, from the school all the way up, and also supports and investments. And the Civics Now, CIVX Now coalition that I'm part of, along with a lot of other people, is working on that. So the goal, in fact, is to try to address the problem that Reneen so eloquently put on the table, which is that everybody should get the education that she's getting.
All right, so that's one of the excellent questions we had. The other one came from Madison, and I'm going to turn to you, Tammy, for that one, asking how do we get civics education embedded in the curriculum earlier in younger grades?
And that is an excellent point, Madison, that you make. And it is essential that we start teaching and focusing on civics education in the early grades. I think sometimes we underestimate the ability of our kindergartners, our first or second graders. And one of the things is that the roadmap does a really great job of breaking down the questions into age-appropriate pieces. For example, theme number 3 for K2 talks about, we the people, and it asks the younger students what kinds of stories, including non-European stories, tell us who we are and where we come from. And then questions that are focused on civics, like how do people become a community? So I think we can teach students at a young age civic skills and civic dispositions, how to have a conversation, how to learn to have a conversation with people we disagree with, what are the ways that we have leadership in our classrooms. And I think that the roadmap does a great job of that. And then each year, in each grade band, it increases in complexity. So we're starting to give them those civic skills and practicing those civic skills and dispositions. So by the time they get up to their 12th grade, then they are well versed in them. And these also create a better school climate for students if they can listen to each other, if they can have opposing viewpoints, if they can see themselves in the history of our country and be able to answer the question, why does this matter? Why am I important? So working with school districts and teachers, bringing professional development, and really getting parents, administrators aboard is really key to this.
All right, really, really helpful information there from Tammy and from Peter. Thank you both. So we have a great question that's just come in across Twitter. I'm going to read it. And this is going to, here we go. With such content-heavy curriculum, how does EAD, Educating for American Democracy, make the tough choices we need to make in order to focus on understanding and to avoid rote memorization and elevate skills such as inquiry? Kay, I'm going to turn to you for this one.
Thanks. It's a great question because I know we heard from teachers who were always worried that they have to cover the content. And this is what Danielle referred to earlier as a shift from breadth to depth. And I know that it's a tough choice, but what we're recommending is a choice to really dig deep and engage deeply with students so that they can actually understand multiple narratives, multiple perspectives across different parts of the United States or different history of our peoples. And that way, students are starting to really understand what it's like to not just understand the content, but what it's like to understand and sometimes disagree civilly to different perspectives. And that's the skill that we're trying to build in students. It's the civic excellence. And if we are able to do that with the strength of the community support, with a strong classroom that can withstand difficult conversations and inquiry that's likely to maybe happen as a result of teaching this roadmap, this is a productive tension that we're asking students and teachers to learn to take and embrace, so that when students are graduating from their public education or private education or what have you, they're prepared for civic life fully. They're able to encounter new problems, find out what the potential solutions and opinions might be about that particular topic, and use the skill to determine what the right thing to do for the group they're in, or for their community, or for themselves. And so we're hoping for that depth that really creates that agency among students of all backgrounds to be able to go out and get more information when they need to, rather than just making sure they heard about something in really, really broad way.
Really helpful. Thank you, Kay. And we do have one more Twitter question, and this one's going to be for Louise. And Louise, this is, how do we foster a grassroots movement for this? What about that?
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. All change is local, and I think parents and students and educators have to make their voices heard. It's actually a great civics problem, right? That's how change happens. And so the first thing to do, I would say, is to contact your local districts, either your principal, your school committee, or similar, and let them know that you think it's really important to teach history and civics, American history and civics. I think the change, we often rely on state policies or federal policies, but really the power of parents is pretty strong. The power of students, the power of educators is strong to make their voices heard for our country. The other thing is that we are hosting office hours for Educating for American Democracy. Sign up and find out other people in your localities that have and share similar interests. That movement building really can happen organically, and that's what we're hoping.
Well, what a great and important note to end on. So much good advice, good information that I know everybody watching and listening can take with them. But as you just heard from Louise, if you have questions, you can reach out, contact the folks at Educating for American Democracy to get more information. But for right now, as we wrap up, let me again thank Louise Dubé, Kay Kawashima Ginsburg, Peter Levine, and Tammy Waller. Really excellent conversation from this panel, and also from our first panel as well. So I am Judy Woodruff, and I want to thank all of you for watching, for listening. I think it's very exciting to see this project get off to such a great, just a really robust start. So wishing all of you the best. Thank you. It's been an honor to be part of this conversation. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jay Pledge, middle school social studies teacher here at Hanscom Middle School in Massachusetts. I have been a teacher for over 20 years, and in that time, I've experienced firsthand the struggle that schools and districts have had centering civic education, as well as how best to engage students in our country's complex history. And that's why I'm pumped to see the advent of the Educating for American Democracy roadmap. We've become too fragmented in our schools, our communities, and our nation. This leads to many kids feeling unaware of our country's great strengths, or totally disengaged in engaging with it at all. Thankfully, this roadmap paves a way to help us bring them back. My military-dependent students, like a lot of other kids, move around often and are exposed to too many different approaches to civics, or none at all. This roadmap helps us focus our collective attention and effort so we can all better engage all of our students civically, no matter what school they attend. This EAD roadmap supports us in ways we haven't been before, as we work to address both the painful and the awesome aspects of our nation's history and government. We have a responsibility to all of our nation's students, and this roadmap helps us to fulfill it.
My name is Jen Rydell, and I teach civics and U.S. history in Bellingham, Washington, spending my days empowering students. I believe with all my heart in what I do, but it has been a lonely path as a civic educator. Civic education, in my view, is at its Sputnik moment. The majority of students do not understand connections between civic ideals, practices, and our nation's history, because civic education for far too long has been sidelined. I want my students' voices heard, don't you? I want my students to see how their stories are woven into the American experience as we the people, and be equipped to build a more perfect union. I am really excited and encouraged by the resources found in the Educating for American Democracy framework. This roadmap has the potential to guide and transform conversations with colleagues in creating engaging civic experiences for all students. It places front and center the importance of knowing our history through a civics lens that's anchored through inquiry practices that allow students to make learning their own. Our students are crying out to be part of our democracy. Educating for American Democracy framework is the bridge to creating a more enlightened and engaged country.
Hello, my name is Ian Rowe. For the last decade, I ran a network of public charter schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. 2,000 students, mostly low income and Black and Hispanic. Each of these kids aspired to live the American dream. The last thing we want to do is to tell our kids that they live in a country that's hostile to those dreams. Instead, they must understand America's history, warts and all, to learn that we live in a good, if not great, country. Educating for American Democracy is building a roadmap for excellence so that teachers can have the tools to empower the rising generation, to have an understanding of how they can seize opportunity and have a voice in our constitutional democracy. Not only a chronology of events, but thematically as well. How did our country bounce back after times of division? How did the embrace of our founding ideals like faith, family, hard work, entrepreneurship lay the foundation for individuals and communities of every race to move from persecution to prosperity? In chapter 13 of de Tocqueville's America, he said, "The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults." I have always found that statement compelling because it resonates with the notion that America is always in pursuit of becoming a more perfect union. Educating for American Democracy will spread the knowledge that embedded within our founding documents and within every young American are the tools for self-betterment and self-renewal.
I'm Van Jones, and I just want to say why I'm so excited to be supporting this new initiative, Educating for American Democracy. You know, a lot of people are worried about democracy. We focus on the obvious problems that we're seeing, the breakdown in governance and civility, but it's time to focus on the solution. The solution in a democracy is always with educating the people. A dictatorship can carry on as long as you got one strong man. A democracy needs strong people, and every generation has to be taught this stuff. It is so exciting. You got 300 scholars from across the political spectrum who've gotten together to give us a tool and a roadmap to connect people to our history, good, bad, and otherwise, so that we can carry this thing forward. A lot of time and energy and money has thankfully gone to STEM education. It's time to do the same thing for civics education. STEM exists in a society. In our society, if it's going to be democratic, it needs initiatives like Educating for American Democracy to continue.
I am honored to be part of the forum today and to help close out this historic session on the roadmap to Educating for American Democracy. I want to thank all those who worked so hard on this effort during a very challenging national emergency to complete such a high quality product. I am proud to be representing the U.S. Department of Education, one of the two federal agencies funding this project, along with the National Endowment for the Humanities and all of our other federal partners who have been part of this amazing collaborative effort. Special thanks and acknowledgement go to the Smithsonian Institution and the National Archives Foundation as the co-hosts of this wonderful event. The U.S. Department of Education has been funding American history projects in one form or another for many years. We have also had the privilege of being responsible to lead the effort since 2005 in implementing a federal law requiring a Constitution Day program at each educational institution that receives federal financial assistance and at each federal agency. With all of our efforts, including the roadmap that is being released today, we are very careful in making sure that our efforts do not in any way direct or control curriculum. Rather, the roadmap provides tools for teachers using their own state and locally determined curriculum to enhance the teaching of history and civics education. At the Department of Education, I've been involved with Constitution Day from when it first started, helping to make materials available and helping to develop programs for a meaningful Constitution Day at all educational institutions and agencies that are covered. This year at our department, we focused on the development of the roadmap and how it would help with learning about the Constitution and our American system of government. Our Constitution is a model and a beacon for human rights across the world. It is the oldest, shortest, and perhaps the most meaningful written constitution. It has been inspiring to many and has been copied many times, but unless we can learn more about it and how to use it well, it will become more of a symbol than a reality. The teaching of civics and history is especially important in a democracy in which people have an opportunity to participate in their government, we the people. But without knowledge of its history and how it really works, it cannot be fully effective as it should be. Recently, the department's Institute of Education Sciences released statistics on the NAEP, or the nation's report card, on how well students were doing with regard to civics, American history, and geography. The results were mixed at best, and they provided a wake-up call that we have a lot of work to do to really help our students make a difference. This is at a time in our history when our institutions are being challenged, and we need an informed student body and residents and citizens to be part of our democracy. Every 2 weeks, I teach a history class for new employees on the history of our government, on education, our Constitution, and the future of education, and how government really works. It gives me an excuse to continually learn more and to check on how well we're doing. I've had the opportunity to attend many student conferences on history and government, and I often hear students talk about working around the systems to get things really done well, rather than working through the system of government. When I hear that, I challenge them to first learn all that they can about how government really works before they give up on it. They definitely can make it work for them if they really try. As part of my responsibilities, I represent the department on the semi-quincentennial commission that is planning our nation's 250th anniversary commemorating our founding. Part of our goals is to use 2026 as a time by which our students should be much better educated in history and civics education. And I am hopeful that our roadmap can help educate our nation's students about the history of our government, how it works, where it has failed, how we've overcome that, and all of its great possibilities so that it works for them in the future. It's not going to be easy. I know teachers are working hard to do that already, and I hope the roadmap and other tools available will help students to do even better and have greater knowledge of our government in the very near future, and certainly by 2026. Thank you for all that you do every day for our teaching and learning of civics and history. Thank you for your work on the roadmap, and let's all work together to form that more perfect union. Thanks so much.
The call. Sound the bells in the public square. Make way, for from the heavens a time of restructuring has come. For the cries for justice from the earth have ruptured and exposed the imperfect systems, and a window of weeding has been allotted to us. An opportunity to uproot, to tend to the land and plant a new harvest for the generations to come. No more room for half-hearted conversations and quick advertisements, band-aids of sympathy on systemic problems. No more room for silent submission in the classroom to the timeline and the apathy as a war for the people erupts on the outside and the youth foam at the mouth, hungry to speak from every perspective. They have chantings growing in their bellies, waiting for the moment, and the moment has arrived. But the moment has been bittersweet, as the discussion that should have commenced with understanding and openness in the classroom is unharnessed, unforgiving outcries in the square. Will we allow the same anger that the generations of old carried be transferred? Or will we do as the times have called? Sit and ponder the plain realities, the disturbing questions of ancient, keeping the nation at war with itself. From every side of the spectrum, we take our places in this conversation. The table has been set. The disaffected have rolled in the chairs, and the youth prepared the room. All that it needs is people to take their seats and speak when no human ear has heard before. Talk between opposing opinions that actually turns into strategy, and strategy into impact, and impact into a better future.
Now is our time.
Our time.
Our time. Our moment.
Our moment.
Our opportunity to transform the way we prepare young Americans for self-governance to sustain our constitutional democracy.
We can only achieve the ambitions of educating for American democracy if we do it together.
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 Here are actionable steps you can take.
Invite others to the table.
Share the roadmap with your network,
colleagues,
your school, and your community leaders. Share your work.
Submit lesson plans and curricular materials through our website to illustrate what EAD looks like in the classroom.
Join the movement.
Sign your organization up to be an EAD champion.
Or visit the Take Action page on the website
to learn more about how individuals can use their voices and expertise to make EAD a reality.
Continue the dialogue.
Attend one of our partner-led webinars or sign up for office hours to learn more by visiting the events page on the website.
And if you're a classroom teacher, seek opportunities to bring the roadmap to life in your classroom.
To inspire student inquiry.
And to braid history and civics into your instruction
so that students are prepared for citizenship.
The original motto of the United States is E pluribus unum.
Out of many.
Out of many.
Out of many. One.
We need many people to participate at this challenging time
in building a new foundation
for excellence in civic and history education.
We invite you to join in.